I've got a blank document open. It's ActionScript 3.0, and I've changed my workspace to small screen. It's one of the workspace options on the workspace switcher. You can still work in Essentials. I'm just using this view to make sure you can see everything since I'm working at kind of a strange resolution. And I'm going to open up my Properties panel to make sure you can see what's going on with my options. I'm going to close this up. Here we go. Okay, so I've got my Properties panel open and I have my Tools panel now on my left-hand side. In the last session, we took a look at drawing in Flash with some of the basic tools. And we noticed that under the drawing tools, we saw that they also had what was called primitive tools for the rectangle and the oval. So let's take a closer look at those. I'm going to click on Rectangle Primitive Tool. You can see that our Properties panel looks very similar to the rectangle tool. Let me go ahead and choose that so we can compare it. You'll see nothing really changes except at the top, just under Properties, under the tab, it tells us it's a rectangle tool or it's the rectangle primitive tool. But everything else is staying the same. I'm going to go ahead and keep the colors I used on my last drawing, which was a dark blue for the fill and a brownish color for the stroke, and my stroke is set to 1. And I'm going to go ahead and draw a rectangle. I'm just going to click and drag to create a rectangle. And you'll notice that when I do this, a little change has happened from when I drew my rectangle as a regular rectangle. Let me go ahead and get another rectangle here and draw it so we can see the difference. Okay, I'm going to let go. Now if I get my selection tool, the letter V on my keyboard, you'll notice that when I select my rectangle at the bottom, which is my regular rectangle tool, we see the dots. When I select a rectangle at the top, that was my primitive rectangle, you'll notice that I have little anchor points popping up at each corner of my rectangle. What that's going to do, it's going to allow us to make modifications to the corners after we've drawn the rectangle. So I can come over to my Rectangle Options panel, and I can click and drag, and I can make adjustments to the shape of my rectangle. And again, you'll notice if I select the one at the bottom, I don't have that option when I drew the traditional rectangle with the regular rectangle shape tool. So here I go. I've got my primitive rectangle selected, and we see here my rectangle options. They're all set so that they're linked. So when I change one, they change all of them. And when I click and drag, you'll see I can make it rounded, or I can come back here to the left, and I can actually make them come where they're indented rather than coming on the outside. So we can make kind of a cool shape there. Now I can turn off and break that link, and I can adjust one of these at a time, and you'll see that each corner could be set differently. Let me change the one here on the bottom right to a 45. You'll see the positive makes the curve on the outside, and the negative number makes it concave going inside to the rectangle. Let me go ahead and click off of that, and you can see that with the primitive tool, we are able to get a little more fancy with drawing with our shapes and after we've actually drawn them. Okay, let me delete this rectangle at the bottom, and now let's get the oval primitive tool. I'm going to keep my colors the same. Let's go ahead and click and drag and draw an oval. And again, you'll notice now we see a little box around the shape showing us that we've drawn with the primitive tool. And again, we now have the options to adjust our start and end angles after we've drawn the shape rather than making that decision before we draw the shape. So let's go ahead and change the start angle. I can drag this out, and you can see kind of looks like Pac-Man. And my end angle, if I draw this one, I start to draw the opposite way. It kind of starts to look like a pie chart. In our inner radius, here we can bring this out, and we start to draw a hole in the middle of our circle. And here we've made the letter C. And we can turn off the close path, and where we just see the stroke and we see no fill. So again, by drawing with our primitive tools, the rectangle primitive tool and the oval primitive tool, we can make changes to our shape after we've drawn it. And just like we drew with the other shapes, if I hold down my Shift key when I'm drawing, I can make a perfect circle. You'll see it kept my settings here, my oval options. So we go ahead and change those back to 0. Here's my perfect circle. I can also hold down my Option key or my Alt key and my Shift key, and I can draw from the inside out. So we still have the capability of drawing the perfect shapes by holding our Shift key, or drawing from the center out by holding our Alt or Option key. And again, once we've drawn with the primitive shape tool, these options here at the bottom on our Properties panel we can change those options after we've drawn rather than trying to figure that out before we get started.